I'm super excited to have a dear friend from Tulum. We met in Tulum, Chelsea Zirna. So welcome, Chelsea. And I wanna ask you, who were you before the you that you are now?
Yes, I love that question. Yeah, thank you for having me. It's so amazing being here. And I'll start off a little bit earlier in my journey because I really feel that we're literally conditioned from when we're children. And so I think it's kind of important to bring that in. So I grew up with a mother who suffered from depression, and she had a lot of trauma as a child. She was raised in an abusive, alcoholic household. And so she was on a lot of medication to kind of help her regulate her emotions. So growing up, I didn't have a healthy relationship to my emotions because I was literally scared of them. I was scared to feel, I was scared to kind of be with myself. And so I did all the things under the book to try and kind of not feel like they were healthy, but like working out, journaling, just sharing, like oversharing everything, because there was a part of me that just could not sit with the discomfort of feeling. And slowly I realized that that wasn't really sustainable. And it really caused me to like emotionally dump on a lot of people, like my mother. She was kind of like holding that for me, and she really couldn't even hold that for herself. So it led me to a lot of relationships that were similar. You know, my partners then played that role, and my friends played that role. And
Mm.
growing up, I kind of had, yeah, a lot of friends that were just not necessarily loving. You know, it was kind of like a lot of the mean girl type of archetype. And so growing up, I felt like I really didn't have a good relationship to my feminine energy at all. I was primarily operating in the masculine energy. Everything was actually about mental optimization. Everything was about how much can I do in order to leave my, in order to not feel, and
Mm.
in order to actually get out of my body so that I didn't have to sit with the discomfort of what was actually coming up. And so I was actually living in a lot of victimhood, a lot of shame for the way I looked. My nose was too big. You know, I was too, my thighs were too large because I was working out so much. Like I was going through all these different things, and I was also blaming a lot. I was blaming the people around me for, wow, they're so mean to me or to other people. And really, I was so disconnected from the concept of sovereignty and taking responsibility for my own emotions and my own experience. And so I got an amazing job out of college. I was working at IBM, and I was getting paid an incredible salary. I was traveling the world. I was doing incredible things, but inside I literally felt dead. I felt like I was trapped. I was put in a cage, and I was getting paid so much, and everyone around me was telling me, oh my God, you're doing so great. Wow, you're on such a great path. You paid off your student loans. You bought a car in cash. You're doing all these amazing things. And inside, I literally felt like I had these golden handcuffs that I could not escape from. And
Mm.
so, a huge part of my journey was actually um, my relationship to alcohol. So, while I was working at IBM, I ended up going on this trip for my birthday, and I ended up getting so wasted, and I puked everywhere, and I forgot my entire birthday. And I remember my friends who came on the trip, everybody was drinking, but someone said to me, you know, this is not the way to spend your birthday. Like, what are you doing? And I was like, well, we're all doing it. Everybody around us is doing it. Everybody's drinking. Everybody's having fun in this way. But for me, it was also like a way to avoid how much I hated my life and my job and what I was doing. And I felt so trapped, and I was not connecting that because I wasn't connected to my emotions and my body. I wasn't listening. I didn't have a sense of my intuition. And so you asked the question of who am I back then and who is I now? In order to get to who I am now, I had to literally um, quit my job, move to Bali, and go on a journey of finding myself, removing all of this conditioning. I like to call it the great purge. It's like we go on this journey of like caterpillar, chrysalis, butterfly is how I like to look at it. And we live our lives as these caterpillars, like getting stepped on and squished on and living in this victimhood state. We go into the chrysalis and then we come out as a butterfly. And this is like a metaphor I love using because it's something that every single human can relate to. A caterpillar has no idea that it could become a butterfly and literally fly on the other side of the journey. And in order to do that, it literally has to break down everything that it knows, all of its cells, into goo and shift. And so that's kind of what I had to do in order to become the person that I am today, is literally release all of my belief systems and all of my conditioning, all of my relationship to money, my relationship to operating in a system that is so set in stone, and having a house and a family and living this certain job and this type of lifestyle, and rethinking the entire thing. And that's actually how I was able to find out, who am I? And I was able to answer that question by breaking down all of the things that I wasn't, all of the conditioning, all the different layers to actually get to that place of who am I now. So it's probably a long-winded answer, but I think if you ask anybody who actually knows themselves who they are, they'll say something really similar.
So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And
Yeah.
like, how did you realize that you needed to change? And how would you, because I feel like so often there's got to be a catastrophe or a health crisis or something that really kind of shakes
Mhm.
somebody to be like, oh wow, like I'm going in the wrong direction. I got to do something and really change my life around. So
Mhm.
what would you say to somebody who's kind of in it and they're not at that stage yet, but like how can they recognize that changes need to be made? And how did you recognize that for yourself?
Yeah. So I'll start off by saying it has nothing to do with age. Some people say that they have like these midlife crises at a certain age, and it really has nothing to do with that. So, like, we can call it a midlife crisis, we can call it like an awakening moment, we can call it this like moment where you're like, oh my God, I have to change. And usually, what that voice is it's a voice of like victimhood and breaking away from and breaking into freedom and liberation from this story of like, I don't have any control of my life and life is happening to me. And so the shift is life goes from happening to me to happening for me. And usually that happens through a series of circumstances. Like in my own personal life, it actually happened around the age of 16, which was a little bit younger, and then it went until I was 25. So I was experiencing this journey for years. And most people, when they have this like awakening moment, it takes a long time to actually realize, oh my God, I can actually do something. Like, I can actually change this. I actually have an influence over the course of my life. Not everything is just out to get me, attacking me, against me. It's actually the opposite, but it's our perception that has to shift. So for
Mm.
me, when I was 16, I was kind of talking about how I was friends with those mean girls. And it actually started off with me realizing that I loved myself. And the self love journey was crucial because instead of having all this shame for my nose and my thighs and all these different things that I hated about myself, in what I was doing was I was surrounded by people who also was in the same exact, way of being. And when I was 16, that shifted. And I actually started making tons of friends with people that I actually really loved because I started loving myself. And up until I was 25, what I was actually doing was learning not only how to love myself, but learning how to be intimate with myself and with other people. I was learning the path of intimacy, which I love to say is into me I see. How deeply do we allow ourselves to be seen and heard? And how are we actually seeing and hearing other people? And so I was even from 16 to 25 dating people that were escape artists. They were masters at going on dates and then just never texting, or they were really, really good at getting wasted on the date, or they were really, really good at just leaving, texting, anything to not be present and to not be intimate. And that was also where I was. And it took a really long time to remove all the layers of hiding and shame and the fear of being seen and actually really being with someone and being present to get to that place where I was like, okay, wow, yeah, I really need to do something. And it didn't come like I didn't consciously say, oh, wow, I'm not being intimate. It actually came as, wow, I need to stop drinking alcohol. Wow, I need to stop doing these things where I'm escaping and avoiding. Wow, where am I leaving my experience and not actually being here? So, yeah, that moment actually happened on that birthday trip that I took when I was about 24. And that was the moment where I was like, I cannot do this anymore. This is not the life that I want to live. I don't care how many people around me are partying to have fun every single weekend. And this is how everyone is meeting. This isn't the way that I want to do it any longer. And I actually ended up doing the whole 30, which is this like diet nutrition challenge for 30 days where it's like no alcohol, no sugar, and no grains. There's like a bunch of different things. But I was like, what do I do if I don't drink alcohol for 30 days? And when you're just graduating in college, and there's tons of people around you, and this is how they're meeting, or even when you're older, into your 30s and 40s, what do? You go out, you get a drink, you do things. But there's such a greater level of presence and intimacy when alcohol isn't involved. This is just my experience, but a lot of people that I talk to say the same thing. And it's usually like a major factor that makes people kind of like lean into their life just a little bit deeper.
Mm, I love that. So, so good. What other obstacles, trials, tribulations did you have to overcome to actually get to where you are now? And I know it's a continuous journey and that sort of thing, but again,
Yeah.
what would people look out for of like, man, like this is so hard, I can't do it, and I think,
Mm.
you know, to share our stories of how we overcame and actually are living a life of peak performance in every area is so so important.
Yeah. Well, I will give kind of like an example based on stages of the journey. And I'm going to talk about the caterpillar stage and then that chrysalis moment of going into the chrysalis and breaking down the goo and then what could happen after, because this is quite important and there's actually key distinct stages in the journey. So the first stage of the journey is kind of like what every single human is kind of living in consistently, and it's kind of this relationship to avoidance and the inability to feel emotion or the desire to not feel, and kind of the disconnection from emotion. So it's a lot of like, it can be escapism through even smaller things like reading or just anything to not feel. It can also be bigger things like alcohol, sex, drugs, um, shopping. I know that's a big one for a lot of people. There's all these ways that we just escape. And it's really just escaping from feeling. And so the first part of the journey is actually about nervous system regulation, and looking at our trauma responses and actually looking at, why am I escaping? What am I scared to feel? What's actually there? And cultivating safety in the body. This is like step one. It's like, how do I feel safe in my environment, safe in my experience? And if safety isn't a word that resonates, some people don't feel safe in their body. But if safety is not the word that resonates, it's like, how do I get comfortable with the discomfort of feeling emotion? So this is like
And how
stage
does
one. Yeah.
how does someone even identify that? Because
Yeah.
it's like, for lack of better terminology, so many of us are not even aware that we're not
Yeah.
aware. So how does someone
Yeah.
identify that they're uncomfortable in their own skin if they're just used to feeling
Totally.
harm and going through the motions and that sort of thing?
Yeah. I think the first thing is like, are you lit up by your life? Are you excited about what you're doing with 90% of your time? Are you happy with the person that you are? Do you have shame around going out in public and raising your hand and speaking your truth when you're in a partnership, in your
Mhm.
relationship? Do you hide things? Like, are you scared to say, wow, I'm really attracted to that woman, or wow, I'm really attracted to that man? Or are there so many things that are hidden in the relationship and it just keeps getting piled and piled and piled, or these little nitpicky things that you're like, oh my gosh, and you're trying to like control the other person and all the things that they're doing. Our relationships is like the first place that it shows up. It's like
Mhm.
the person that you're literally choosing to spend your life with. It's usually a good indicator of where you're at. It's not about the other person, it's about where you're at. So if there's tons of conflict in your relationship, there's a really good chance that there is a lot of stuff there. Especially when it comes to the victimhood journey. Nobody likes to call themselves a victim. No one likes to believe that they're a victim, but it's literally the journey of blame and shame. Are you ashamed? Meaning, do you have judgment around yourself? And do you feel like there's parts of you that are wrong, literally? Or do you think that the other person is always wrong and you're always blaming them? That's the blame journey. Most people, they'll operate in that for their whole lives. Truly, most people won't ever get out of that stage. If they do, they'll get to the second stage, which I could talk about after, which is the self-love journey. And that's a huge journey for a lot of people, but it's also the journey of this dualistic thinking where there's a right and a wrong and a good and a bad, and it leads to consistent polarization. And there's never this recognition of acceptance. It's a lot of still judgment. It's criticism instead of self-love, self-acceptance, and recognizing that there is no right or wrong, good or bad. It's just perception and perspective. But most people, especially if they're super into, you know, like different things, like politics is a huge thing, right? There's two sides to the story. It's this or this. And if it's not one, the other one is wrong. And I'm willing to bake my life on it. This is what we do throughout most of our lives, and this transfers into partnership. This transfers into everything that we do. So yeah, a lot of, the first place that we can look is in ourselves and through our closest relationships.
I love
Yeah,
that. Last question for this section, and we'll save the on the other side for your talk. But
sure.
um, so, what would you say to somebody who's like, love myself? Yeah, like I love myself, But
Yeah,
again, they're not aware, right? And maybe they've cultivated peak performance in one area of their life, but they're sacrificing their health or like maybe let's say they're making a lot of money, right? And
yeah,
they're like, of course I love myself. Like, look how hard I work. But they're
yeah,
sacrificing their
exactly.
health, their relationships are poor, and they're not even fulfilled at what they're doing. What would you say to
Yeah.
somebody?
Yeah, this is a good question. I think self-worth and self-love are very intimately connected. If you're more in your masculine, you'll tend to care more about self-worth. And if you're more in your feminine, you'll care more about self-love. But the two are almost mirrors of each other. So if you're saying things like, I work really hard, I love what I do, la la la, then you're building up a lot of self-worth. But where you get triggered is anything to do with your worth. If anyone ever says anything about your worth, about the work that you do, if there's any feedback, if there's any sort of challenge with, the way that you're doing things, or, the relationship to perfection, it's an attack on the self-worth, then this is also related to self-love. Can you love yourself regardless of what you do? Can you love yourself no matter what you do? Can you love yourself for who you are? And so this is kind of like the cover, the self-worth and the self-love. And there's a beautiful tool that we love using. And you can look it up. It's called the coaching wheel. And there's like 8 to 10 different categories. Some of them have 12 categories. And you can literally rate yourself from a scale of 0 to 10 in every single category when it comes to romance, when it comes to work life, when it comes to financial life, when it comes to fun, when it comes to different categories in your life. And it's important to have balance. If you only love yourself when you have a 10 on the health and fitness scale, then do you really love yourself? Can you love yourself throughout the whole journey? A huge part of this is, can I love myself when I'm not perfect? And most people, they strive for perfection, right? Everyone's like, oh, I want to be perfect, la la la. But perfection is the enemy to progress. And so you're not even allowing yourself to love yourself when you're putting this block of perfection in front of you. And that creates judgment, and that creates shame, and that creates a lack of intimacy. So at the end of the day, it's still an avoidant pattern. So what we want to do is love ourselves and just assess and learn to accept where we're at, and then say, okay, great, what do I do from here? And then we can make shifts and we can change. But if we're so in self-judgment around having like a 2 in one of the categories that we literally start criticizing ourselves and attacking ourselves, do we really love ourselves?
Mm.
So yeah, it's kind of it's in this, and when we rate ourselves, it really shows both the self-worth and the self-love, because we're actually looking at the holistic view of our lives, and we're assessing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so powerful. Yeah, and that's, it's a really good point, because peak performance in every area of your life does not mean perfection. And I love what you said about loving yourself, because it's loving all of those parts, even the shadows. And oftentimes, um, I know on my journey, I've made myself wrong for feeling a certain way or thinking a certain thing, or even how I've showed up, instead of just, hey, like, I'm going to love all of that, and I'm still on the journey. I'm still willing to work on myself. I'm still willing to progress and do what I can to bring all the pieces back, so that I can be as high of a peak performer in every area of my life.
exactly. It's like a double-edged sword. It's like if you're not doing well in a certain area and then you criticize yourself and you stop loving yourself, it's really hard to progress from that place. But
Mhm.
when you see where there's some challenge and you love it, then there's an opportunity to be like, okay, I'm here and I'm here
Mhm.
for myself. And I
Yeah.
recognize where I am and I'm ready. I'm ready for more.